in our spotlight, we have the Minister of Education. We are looking at what has transpired over the last year plus since the beginning of the pandemic and just how children have been able to make that transition to online learning, to learning through packages, really. But recently we heard of a school, a preschool that was opened, and somehow a child drowned. Condolences to the family. And we'll talk to the minister about these and lots more. Good morning to you, Minister Nyan Gatsby-Dolly.
Hi, good morning, Natalie. Good morning. Good to all your viewers and listeners. How are you doing?
Welcome to the Now Morning Show.
Thank you, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes, yes. So, Minister, before we get into the national consultation on education, if we could just touch a little bit on that preschool. As far as we are aware, according to the public health regulations, preschools are still supposed to be closed, not so?
Yes, preschools are not open.
Right, but yet we had a situation where a child drowned at a preschool that was opened. How does the ministry treat with something like that from that perspective?
Well, first off, Natalie, that institution, we have gone, the Ministry of Education's officers have gone out. We are not certain that that is a preschool. What we are hearing reports of is that there are children 2 years old, 6 years old. So it does not seem to be a preschool in the regular sense of the word. It's not registered with the ministry. We have no information about its operations. We went, we visited. There's no signage. So we're trying to get really the information about what really this institution is, because as you know, over this time there's been the development of quite a few underground kind of daycare centers or childcare centers that are assisting persons, and that is under the radar. And we do not have information of this actually being a preschool. So we are actually, from the ministry side, doing some investigation. As I said, we visited. There was the place was locked up. There was no signage, no indication that, you know, this was actually a preschool operating. Based on the ages of the children, we've heard, just based on the reports in the media attending. So we are not sure exactly what this institution was, so I don't want to say it's a preschool, and we are trying to find out what exactly was going on there from our end. But certainly, preschools are not to be open at this time based on the health regulations, and so if it was operating like a preschool or a daycare, it would have been in breach of the public health regulation.
Right. I know people are, where somehow in the articles that we've seen published, people have made reference to special needs. But are there any provisions made for special needs schools? Are there any exceptions to the rules?
No. At this time, no. The students that are out are students from Form 4 to 6. Now, I can tell you that the first meeting we had with the Ministry of Health regarding fiscal reopening, the special needs students were at the top of our priority list, understanding that there would be challenges to their ability to learn at home, because a lot of these students require use of aids and so on that would have been provided to the schools. However, the concern of the Ministry of Health was the fact that quite a few of the special needs children are at-risk children as well. Yeah. And so they did not want them to be at the start of the fiscal return, because they wanted to see how it went, and, you know, just in case we had any issues or problems, we did not want our special needs children to be the ones to be exposed. So that is the reason why the special needs children were not brought out at the start. I mean, we at the ministry would have given from the ministry's computers that were distributed throughout the secondary schools, we would have given computers to the special needs children very early on. That would have been either September or October. And those would have been the only children receiving from the ministry's stock of computers, because we understood the challenges involved. And so we were very partial to, you know, ensuring that they were seen about, but based on the Ministry of Health advice, that is why we did not bring them out in the first instance.
Right. You know, Minister, when you explain all of this to me, it sounds reasonable that, you know, what the steps that are being taken by the Ministry of Health. But then we ended up with the death of a child. It's one thing for people to try to have these underground schools, so to speak, pop up, to whether it's to help, whether it's to child care centers, daycare centers, because I understand that side of it too, where parents are back out to work and probably wondering where they're going to leave their children. But a child died, whether it's through negligence, whether it's accidental, whatever the cause may be. Is there anything that the ministry can do to safeguard children and parents from these situations?
I don't know that the Ministry of Education at this time can do anything in these kinds of unfortunate circumstances. We regulate from preschools up, so the daycare centers are a different matter. And I understand the challenges of parents. It is a difficult time globally, parents trying to, once schools are closed, and that's why the government has been so firm on getting the numbers under control so that our schools can reopen, even if it's partially, and we can get to that point. Because the operations of schools are fundamental to the operations of society. So I think the best thing the Ministry of Education can do, and working in tandem with the government, is to ensure that we do everything at our schools that are partially open, that we don't do anything to raise the numbers anymore. Because once we can get our numbers under control, we can restart our schools and have some sense of normalcy. I'm seeing what's happening in Jamaica. We're seeing what's happening in places where, because of the situation with parents needing to go back to work and schools need to be open, countries rushed ahead and open schools. We're seeing it in Barbados as well. Open schools and so on, so that we can get back to that sense of normalcy. Because of this situation where parents need that, and we see the results and what's happening in those countries. So I think the best thing we can do as the Ministry of Education is to ensure that the protocols are kept at the schools that are open now, so that we don't cause spreading in the schools themselves, and we listen to the advice of the Ministry of Health and work along with them to ensure that our schools don't become areas of spread, so that we get back to normalcy as soon as possible.
And Minister, I do remember when the proposition for the reopening of schools for certain grades of children, certain forms of children came about, that there were talks about having nurses, public health bodies, close by schools so that they can do constant checks. What's been happening with that?
All right. The concept of the Education District Health Unit was that we would have 40 nurses headed by a doctor in the first instance, and the nurses would be 2 per district, not to operate in a nursing capacity, but to operate in an advising and coordinating capacity, where when if schools had any issues, they would be able to call on these particular persons who will be the liaison between the schools and the health institutions in the district. So that unit has been set up. We have the nurses and the doctor operating. We just had about 11 out of the 14 nurses right now. And so they are operating in every district in Trinidad, and they are in contact with the schools. The nurses have been going out to the schools. They have been, they're resident at some of the schools in the district. They have been going out to the different schools, interacting with the principals, because that came out of the stakeholder meetings. But when we met with stakeholders, they spoke about when school operated in 2020 for exams, July 2020, what happened is that they found that the principals were not able to quickly react and interface with the health institutions when necessary. So they are they are performing that coordinating role, and so they are in the districts right now, and they are operating.
All right, well, I'm definitely happy to hear that, but let's talk about those schools that, well, those children who are back out to school. We know that an SCA exam is coming up, as well as the CAPE CXC exams. Talk to us about that. I know that there are guidelines that were sent out by the Ministry of Education for these students. What are the guidelines, especially for those CAPE and CSEC students? Because I know some people will read, some people would have missed it all.
Yes, we certainly circulated those guidelines. They're available on the website and so on, so parents and so on can have an idea. Basically, the guidelines set out how we are to behave in terms of the protocols, how the schools, the classrooms are to be distanced, the operations of the entry protocols. Students have to be masked, they have to sanitize and wash their hands and so on before they get into the school, the encouragement of the students to keep to the protocols throughout the school day, and we ask schools, to make these announcements so that the behaviors that need to be maintained are maintained. So we spoke to that. We spoke to the fact that the schools should operate virtually as much as possible for teaching and bring the students out mainly for practical assignments. Of course, there would be instances where, that would have to be varied, and we left that up to the schools, but the guideline is as much as possible. You operate teaching virtually.
Right.
And so we've come to the end of the second term. This is the last day of school, and we're happy that the numbers, we're seeing an uptick now, but we are not necessarily seeing that being attributed to the operational schools. We would have visited quite a few schools. We get weekly reports about what's happening, and we are really working in tandem with the schools, with the principals, to ensure that these protocols are kept. And I would say in the main, we have seen schools, administration, teachers, parents, and students really keeping to the protocols and ensuring that we don't have super spreading going on at the level of the school. And we're very grateful for that.
Right. I know that common entrance, that some decisions were taken regarding the Caribbean Secondary Examination Certificate and the Caribbean Advanced Proficiency Examination in terms of the papers, how they're to be done, the SBAs, and that children will be given the opportunity to defer their exams if they so choose. Could you just talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah. What's happening is that CXC has made some accommodations. In terms of SBAs and practical subjects, certificates and so on, they have made some accommodations in reducing the number of labs to be done and so on, and practicals to be done. And with respect to the examinations themselves, the Ministers of Education did come together with CXC to discuss the format of that, and it was decided that we would go back to the regular format of exams where there'd be paper 1 and paper 2 along with the SBA. With respect to the outcry about the results in 2020, CXC has indicated that, well, they indicated that a while ago that they will be keeping the 100% format moderation for SBA, meaning that every center will be moderated, which is a departure from what would have happened in 2019. It did happen in 2020, and there were some issues arising out of that, and they have indicated that they are keeping that moderation because they want to have a close look at what's happening in the practical examinations, and so they're doing that, as well as we are going back to the regular papers. Now, the fact is that some countries are experiencing great difficulty now. The schools that were once open have been closed. We are in the opposite situation where our schools were closed and have now opened. But in both cases, it poses a challenge with respect to some students not being able to access their labs and so on, not being able, some of them, to be on the virtual platforms and not necessarily being able to have the best of the education that they would have needed in the preparation for exams. So in that circumstance, CXC has said that they will allow students who feel that they are not adequately prepared. They have until May to defer the examinations, and CXC is going to send out some further information on the process for that, and they will be able to defer keeping their SBA marks, as well as not having to pay any penalties to do the exams in 2022. So that's an option available. It will be available in May. That will be the deadline for them to do that, and we are awaiting CXC's instructions, further instructions, and as soon as we get that about how that is to proceed, we will send that out to the citizenry through the schools and so on, so students will know what they have to do.
Minister, what has the communication been like with the parents and teachers and students, though? Because after the mess of 2020 with the results, the CXC, the CAPE results, I know that a lot of people are still uncomfortable. So do you believe that even going back to the previous format for the SBA marking will give them that confidence that their grades are going to be intact and okay?
I think that will go a long way. The decisions that were taken for this to happen came through meetings with the Ministers of Education. Of course, we would have consulted with our governments. And I think there's consensus in the region that going back to the paper 2, which is one of the papers that would distinguish in many cases the students' knowledge, I think that would offer to the students a level of comfort knowing that they have all the options available to them to perform in the exam as they were accustomed to. And one of the things that the Ministers of Education have asked for, and we are still awaiting a bit more communication from CXC to ensure that all the information is out there and students are very clear. As a member of the Ministry of Education, we have ensured that whatever information we got from CXC, we relayed that quickly and efficiently through all the channels to the schools and on social media to ensure that the public is well apprised and remove the level of uncertainty, because I think that's what disturbs persons the most, the level of uncertainty, not being sure what's happening. So we have been relaying as much information as possible, and certainly in this area of deferrals that you have asked about, that is one of the areas that gives us a little bit of concern, because we want our students and parents to be very clear about what that process is, but we don't have that information just yet. And if we don't get it soon, we will reach out to CXC asking that more better particulars be supplied so that everyone is clear about the options and how they go about them.
Minister, I am way over my time, but I can't have you here without asking about what's going to be happening with the Concordat and the SCA, because I know those were two critical areas coming out of the national consultation on education in terms of the changes that people wanted going forward.
Yeah, the thing is, there are many views about the SCA, and there are also many views about the Concordat, and views about really what happens at the government schools and how does that put them at a disadvantage to the denominational schools. So the issue is the Concordat, yes, but it's also a bigger issue of the operation of the government schools. And so, as you would have known, a committee has been formed under the Office of the Prime Minister to look more closely at that issue. The committee is yet to be convened. There are a couple of the organizations that have to supply members that have not yet supplied. So we are just working and reminding them that we want to convene this committee as soon as possible so that they can take a more in-depth look at how we transition from primary to secondary school. It's not so much the SDA, but it is a matter of the transition, and it's not so much a Concordat as it is the operations of government schools as opposed to denominational schools, and looking to see how the Concordat figures into all of that, and if there's need for revision, if there's not need for revision, and where the revisions may lie. And so we are expected that within this week we'll be able to convene that committee, just get the last few members from the different organizations, convene that committee, and really take a look at what came out of the consultations, take a closer look with the denominational boards, look at and get their points of view and get their recommendations, and anybody else that they may wish to take views from, and then come up with firm and specific recommendations to the cabinet. So we anticipate that that's going to happen within the next week or so. That committee will be convened.
All right, Minister, I want to thank you so much for speaking with us this morning.
Certainly. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. The Honourable Minister of Education, Dr. Nian Gatsby-Dolly, talking to us about CXC, CAPE, SCA, Concordat, National Consultation on Education, and so much more. We take a break and we'll be back with you.